Maria Helena Bergoglio always lived away from the spotlight, while her brother, Jorge Mario Bergoglio, ascended to the highest rank in the Catholic Church. She chose silence, a simple life, and the tranquility of Buenos Aires. At 78 years old, her routine was modest. She woke up early, said her morning prayers, tended to her plants, and dedicated part of her day to reading and writing letters that she regularly exchanged with her brother, now known as Pope Francis. Despite the weight of age, she was still a lucid woman, with eyes that reflected decades of untold stories. But that morning, something was different. The air seemed denser, the sun streamed through the window with an unusual intensity, and a sudden weakness swept through her body. She tried to get up, but an overwhelming dizziness made her grasp the arm of the chair, feeling the world spin around her. The tightening in her chest came without warning. First, a slight pressure, as if someone were pressing against her ribs. Then a growing, suffocating pain that radiated to her arms and neck. Maria Helena tried to call for help, but her voice did not come out. Her vision darkened for a moment, and an intense cold took over her body. Time seemed to slow down. She felt as if she were being pulled away from herself, as if reality were unfolding in invisible layers. It was then that something happened that defied any logical explanation. The sound around her completely vanished. The noise of the city disappeared, the clock hands stopped, and she realized that she was no longer inside her body. She floated above herself, observing her own motionless figure in the chair, her head tilting slightly to the side. The scene was at once familiar and strange, like watching a movie in which she was a part but unable to interact with it. For a moment, Maria Helena felt a mix of confusion and fascination. There was something incredibly liberating in that sensation of lightness, as if all the pain and limitations of the body had vanished. She tried to speak, but realized she no longer had a voice, or rather she didn't need one. Everything around her was immersed in absolute calm, a silence that was not empty, but filled with an indescribable presence. Then, a subtle, almost imperceptible force began pulling her upward. The room she was in became hazy, as if it were dissolving into a field of light. She felt as if she were passing through some sort of tunnel, but not a physical tunnel. It was as if she were moving through invisible layers of existence, each one taking her further away from her former reality. It was then that she began to see scenes from her life pass before her, but in a way she had not expected. They were not just disjointed images, but complete moments, filled with emotion, as if she were reliving everything anew. She saw her childhood alongside Jorge, the days of playing in the humble family home, the times they argued, laughed, and cried together. Then came the farewell, when he decided to follow the path of the priesthood, the loneliness she felt when watching him depart for a life that would never be shared in the same way again. Each memory carried a new understanding, not just of the facts themselves, but of how each choice shaped her destiny and that of her brother. Suddenly, Maria Helena realized she was not alone. A presence manifested by her side, not a visible figure, but something she felt deeply, as if an ancient and loving consciousness were guiding her path. There were no words, only direct communication, an instant understanding that went beyond what human senses could grasp. She felt a question arise within her without anyone having asked it. Do you understand the purpose of your life? The answer did not come immediately. Instead, more scenes began to unfold before her, but now they were not just moments from her own journey. She saw Jorge in the Vatican, alone, sitting in a chair in front of a pile of documents, his head bowed, his shoulders heavy with worry. She saw him amidst the crowd, smiling at the faithful, yet carrying a silent sadness. Later, she saw him praying for her, holding a small rosary between his fingers, murmuring words she could not hear, but that she felt deep within her soul. And then the most unexpected revelation came. She realized that despite the distance and the weight of the papacy, her brother had never stopped thinking of her. Amid the chaos of the world, among the responsibilities of being the church's leader, he was still, above all, Jorge, her brother, who cared, who missed her, who longed to be closer. Emotion overwhelmed Maria Helena in a way she had never experienced before. It was as if all the barriers that time and distance had imposed between her and Jorge simply no longer existed. The love that united them was there, pure, without words, without doubts, but at the same time, an unease was growing within her. If she were experiencing all of that, did it mean that her life on earth could be coming to an end? The idea of leaving did not frighten her. There was no pain, fear, or regret in that place. But there was something unfinished, something she felt she still needed to do. It was then that a golden light began to envelop her, as if she were being covered by a veil of warmth and peace. The presence by her side remained silent, yet she felt that the decision was hers. She could move forward, completely crossing over to that other realm, where the weight of the world no longer existed. Or she could return to her fragile body, to the pains of old age, to the loneliness of a life where she had always been in the shadow of a brother who became a global icon. The choice seemed obvious, but something within her hesitated, and in that hesitation she heard, for the first time, a sound piercing the absolute silence: her own name. The call came as a whisper, yet it carried a force that transcended everything. Maria Helena. It was a familiar voice, full of urgency and tenderness at the same time. She turned, trying to locate where it came from, and it was then that she saw something that took her breath away. If she was still breathing there. Jorge was standing before her, but not as the Pope Francis the world knew him. He looked younger, as in the times when they still lived together in Buenos Aires. His gaze was intense, and although his lips did not move, Maria Helena felt the words echo within her. "It is not your time. Yet you need to come back." A wave of emotion took hold of her. How could he be there? Did it mean that Jorge was also about to depart? Her heart tightened at the possibility, but before she could react, the scene began to change. The golden light around her intensified, and her consciousness was sucked back, as if pulled into an invisible whirlwind. She felt a pressure on her chest, a familiar weight, a dull pain spreading through her limbs. The silence was broken by the most unexpected sound. Of all, the rustle of leaves in the wind, the distant noise of cars, the insistent ticking of the clock on the wall of her living room. And then, with a start, Maria Helena opened her eyes. The return was brutal. The lightness and peace she had felt moments before vanished completely, replaced by an overwhelming sensation of weight and pain. Her chest burned, her lungs struggled to draw in air, and a cold sweat covered her skin. For a moment, she did not know where she was. The world around her seemed distant, unreal, as if she were still between two realms. But then, reality imposed itself forcefully. She was back at her home, in the same chair where it had all begun. The room remained the same, but something inside her had changed forever. Maria Helena tried to move, but her body still seemed weak. With effort, she reached out to the table beside her, where her telephone rested. She needed to call someone, to tell them what had happened. But who would believe her? Who would understand the depth of what she had just experienced? Her fingers trembled as they slid over the keypad, and without even realizing it, she dialed a number she knew by heart. When the call connected, a familiar voice answered on the other end of the line. "Dear sister, I was just thinking about you." Jorge's voice sounded calm, yet with a tone laden with meaning. She closed her eyes, feeling the tears roll down her face. Somehow he knew. Maria Helena tried to speak, but her throat felt dry, as if she had gone hours without uttering a single word. Her heart still pounded rapidly. Her mind struggled to process everything that had happened. How could she explain to her brother what she had just experienced? How to describe that feeling of being beyond time and space, of seeing him there, young once more, asking her to return? A shiver ran down her spine. It was still hard to believe that it had been real, and at the same time, she knew it was not a mere daydream. "Are you all right, sister?" Jorge's voice sounded worried on the other end of the line. Maria Helena closed her eyes and took a deep breath before answering. "Yes, but I need to tell you something." The silence lingered for a moment, as if he already knew that what was coming next was important. She then began to describe her experience, trying to find words that did justice to what she had felt. She recounted the pain, the sensation of being torn from her own body, the journey through the light, and the memories that had resurfaced before her. When she mentioned his presence there, in the way that reminded her of his youth, she felt a shiver on the other end of the line. The silence that followed was almost palpable. Maria Helena waited, her heart still racing, trying to guess her brother's reaction. Then she heard a sigh on the other end of the line, followed by a grave and thoughtful tone. "Maria Helena, I had a dream last night." Those words made her catch her breath. "In the dream, I was in our childhood home. You were there, but you seemed distant, as if you were about to leave. I tried calling you, but you wouldn't listen. Then suddenly you looked at me, and I knew I had to say something. I had to bring you back." The shock coursed through Maria Helena's body like an electric current. How was that possible? She had seen Jorge during her experience, exactly as he had seen her in his dream. Her eyes filled with tears. "Jorge, it wasn't a dream. I was there. I saw you. I heard you. Tell me it wasn't my time." The confession came loaded with emotion, and on the other end of the line, her brother remained silent for a few moments. When he finally spoke, his voice carried a quiet certainty. "Then, God still has something for you here." Maria Helena let her brother's words echo within her. "God still has something for you here." But what? For years she had chosen to live away from the spotlight, avoiding too much involvement with the public figure her brother had become. She had always believed that her mission was silence, a simple and discreet life. However, after what she had experienced, that certainty began to crumble. She could not simply ignore what she had felt, nor the inexplicable connection she had experienced with Jorge in that other realm. Perhaps there was still something to be said, something that only she could share. "I saw things I never imagined, Jorge, but above all, I saw you, and I realized how much you still bear that burden alone." Her voice trembled, overwhelmed by emotion. "I always thought my role was to stay in the background, but maybe it's time to tell the truth about you, about the man I know, not just the Pope the world sees." There was a pause, and then a low, serene laugh came from the other end of the line. "If that is your mission, Maria Helena, then so be it, but do it with a light heart. Because in the end, we are just two children from Buenos Aires, living what God destined for us." The words of her brother echoed within her, bringing an unexpected warmth to her chest. We are just two children from Buenos Aires. How had life taken them so far? How had that little boy who ran through the city streets, who shared bread with her at the table, become a world leader? And how was it that she, who had always remained on the sidelines, now felt this call to emerge from silence? Maria Helena knew she could not ignore what she had experienced. It had been real, and if God had given her a second chance, then she needed to understand why. In the following days, the experience continued to haunt her, not in a bad way, but as a constant presence, a reminder that something had changed. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw that golden light, felt the indescribable peace that had enveloped her, heard Jorge's voice calling her name. It was not merely a delusion of an aged mind, nor a passing fancy. It was a call, a purpose. And for the first time in a long while, Maria Helena felt that she still had something to offer the world. Maria Helena decided that she needed to record her experience. She grabbed an old, leather-bound notebook where she used to write down her thoughts and memories, and began to write. The words flowed with a clarity she had never experienced before. She described every detail: the sudden pain, the feeling of leaving her body, the absolute silence, the golden light, the invisible presence guiding her, and above all, the encounter with Jorge in that other realm. As she relived everything in her writing, she felt a certainty forming within her. It had not been a dream, nor an hallucination. There was a purpose behind everything she had experienced. While she wrote, a persistent thought began to take shape. For years, she had evaded questions about her brother, about his life, about the man behind the Pope. She had always believed that the best way to protect him was to remain silent. But now she understood that her role could be different. Perhaps it was time to tell her version of the story, not to feed empty curiosities, but to reveal the truth about Jorge, the brother, the man of faith, the human being full of contradictions, doubts, and sacrifices that few knew. In the following days, Maria Helena spent hours immersed in her notes, organizing thoughts, reliving memories, and trying to understand the true meaning of her experience. For the first time in years, she felt guided by something greater than her own will, and it was then that she made a decision. She would give an interview, not to fuel controversies or seek attention, but to share what she knew, to offer the world a different perspective on her brother, not the untouchable figure of Pope Francis, but the man who carried an immense burden on his shoulders and who, nevertheless, still found time to remember her. On the day of the interview, she felt strangely calm. Sitting before the journalist, she took a deep breath and began to tell her story. She spoke of their humble childhood, of Jorge's calling to the priesthood, of the difficulties they faced and the joys they shared. But when it came to the moment of her near-death experience, she hesitated. How could someone who had never gone through it understand what she had felt? How to explain the transition between two worlds, the sensation of floating between life and death, the reunion with Jorge in a reality that defied all logic? But then, she remembered the peace she had experienced and the certainty she had felt upon hearing her brother say it was not yet her time. And with that memory, she found the courage to move forward. With every word spoken, Maria Helena realized that the interview was not just a story for the public, but also a process of understanding for herself. When she described the golden light and the absolute peace she had felt, the journalist fell silent, listening intently. She noticed his intrigued look, as if he were trying to process something that defied any rational explanation. "So, you believe you were with your brother in another realm?" he asked, choosing his words carefully. Maria Helena paused for a moment before replying, "I don't believe it. I know it." At the end of the interview, she felt an unusual lightness, as if a weight had been lifted from her shoulders. For the first time, there were no doubts within her. What she had experienced was real, and her mission was no longer to hide, but to share. The next day, she received a phone call from Jorge. "I read your interview, sister." His voice was calm, but there was something more, a tone of contained emotion. "I always knew you had something important to say. I'm glad you found your voice." Maria Helena smiled, closing her eyes for a moment. Yes, she had finally found her voice. And perhaps that was the true purpose for which she had returned. In the days that followed, Maria Helena received countless messages from people who had read her interview. Some expressed surprise, others skepticism, but most shared stories of their own inexplicable experiences. People from different parts of the world wrote saying that they had gone through something similar, the feeling of leaving the body, the comforting light, the presence of a loved one who had already departed. For the first time, Maria Helena realized that she was not alone. Her experience, which once seemed isolated and unreachable, was now part of a greater mystery, something that connected countless people throughout history. She continued writing, Her memories, once kept only to herself, now took shape on page after page of a notebook that was becoming increasingly filled. But something inside her told her that this journey was not yet complete. One night, after finishing a new note, she felt a gentle breeze sweep through the room, although all the windows were closed. Her heart raced, not out of fear, but recognition. A thought occurred to her, strong and clear, as if someone were whispering it into her. Mind, you have found your purpose. Now live it. Maria Helena closed the notebook and took a deep breath. For the first time in a long while, she felt complete, as if all the pieces of her life were finally in place. She did not know how much time she had left in this world, but now she was sure of one thing: she was here for a reason. Her story was not just about being the sister of a pope, but about finding her own voice, her own path. What she had experienced on that border between life and death was not a coincidence, but a calling, a reminder that she still had something to offer, something to say. That night, before going to sleep, she wrote one last letter to Jorge. I know that one day we will see each other again, but until then, I want to cherish every moment I have been given. Silence has always been my refuge, but now I understand that it can also be a prison. I will no longer hide. If God has given me more time, it is because there is still something to be done, and I am ready. She folded the letter carefully, and before turning off the light, looked out the window. The night was serene, and a subtle glow crossed the sky. Maria Helena smiled. She knew that, wherever she was, that presence she had felt would still be with her.